Hi, it's Kristen with Create Kids Couture, and today I'm going to show how to pin and attach the sleeve and the collar onto Porter's shirt. The same is for Eric's and Candace's and a few of our other shirts. I've already gone ahead and sewn the front of my shirt to the back, and now we're going to place that with the right side up and then put the sleeve curve on it with the right side down. Now with some sleeves you would start pinning from the center and work your way out, but because we have a different curve on the front of the shirt than on the back for a good tailored fit, we are actually going to start on the ends. So I'm going to take the end of my sleeve and match it up with the end curve here. And put a few pins in. And then I'm going to go into the other end of the sleeve and the other end of the armhole curve and pin that one in place. Okay, now we have both ends of the sleeve secure. Now if you look closely at it, it looks like our sleeve curve is going to be too big for the armhole curve, but we actually want it to be that way so that it gives kind of a neat tailored fit over the shoulder. So what is actually happening is that this curve that's cut on the curve, it's kind of on the bias. It allows us almost to stretch it apart. So if you're having a hard time matching up the curves, that's why, but it is the right sizing for it. So as I go, I'll now pin from this side over and kind of work toward the middle, but as I lay the sleeve up against the shirt, I do kind of pull it tight and not quite gather it, not quite a pucker, but you do just pull it nice and tight there so that your so that along the full length of it, it will end up nice and even. You shouldn't have any extra overage on either end. I'll come over to this side and kind of do the same thing. Again, I kind of pull the shirt side tight while keeping the sleeve side loose. Now again, you could, some patterns would have them match up exactly, but I really like how it turns out when you kind of stretch as you go. And that kind of helps us end up nice and even right there. In fact, I almost stretched a little too much. I'm going to go back and see how I removed a pin. I just saw that it needed a little more. Now if I had ended up with it being too short or too long, you just go back and remove some pins and reset it. Sometimes you have to kind of lift it up so it's more 3D. Notice I'm not working with it flat on the board because two curves don't line up very well that way. I have it up 3D so that I can kind of pull the sleeve down into the shirt as I'm pinning along there. And I went ahead and had that pinned. Now as I sew, I like to turn the sleeve over and sew from this side, and I do remove the pins as I go, but that way this edge is flat as it goes across your sewing machine, and you can kind of keep an eye on these parts where it could pucker if you're not watching it. But as I sew through, I do that and I just kind of nicely flatten it out as I go so that there aren't any puckers there along the whole edge. And then that's how the sleeve is done. Okay, now I am pinning the second sleeve, and I got to this point and we'll be able to see a little bit better on this one where sometimes people get caught up thinking that it doesn't line up. Here you can see I have quite a bit extra of the sleeve curve left over, but instead of saying, oh no, it doesn't match up, what we do is we kind of pull it down. Just remember that a sleeve is 3D. It's not flat on your surface. So you just kind of slide it down in until it does match up right. And then I will pin along that edge, and you kind of have to work with it. Just pull it down, and if it doesn't lay flat like that, then make it 3D. The same goes for casings on diaper covers. I know some people struggle a lot trying to get your casing folded flat on a curve, but you can't make a flat fold on a curve. When you're working with curves, you have to kind of keep it 3D and work with the angles on that. So you can see that where at first it seemed that my curve was off, it actually ended up working in there perfect. And again, as I sew it, I'll sew from this side so that I can make sure that those little extras are not caught in my seam allowance, because that's what creates a pucker. I just make sure it's flat the whole way as I sew. So there are our pin sleeves. I'll go ahead and sew them now. Okay, I went ahead and sewed the sleeves on. As you can see, it's a nice even attachment there all the way around, no puckers. And so now we're ready to go on to the next tricky part, which is attaching the collar. We get a lot of questions about that. So what I did is I finished constructing my shirt. I sewed the arms, did the hems, and now all that's left is sewing on the buttons, of course, and putting on the collar. So I constructed my collar according to my pattern, and then on the side that does not have the interfacing, I went ahead and marked the center of that with a pin, just so you have an idea where we're starting at right now. Okay, so I'm going to turn my shirt so that I'm looking at the back of it, but the right side of the fabric is up, and you can see here's the notch that marks the back. So I'm going to take my pin of the collar, and again, it's the side that does not have the interfacing. I'm going to line the center of the collar up with the center of the shirt. I'm going to pin that in place with a few pins, just so the center of the collar is nice and secure there. Okay, now what we're going to do is go all the way to the edge of the shirt. Now notice that I've already made the casing, or the placket for my buttons, so I've already folded in that amount. Now we get to this point and a lot of people think that the collar is too short for their shirt. See how it comes out a little short? But actually what we're going to do is we're going to ease the collar on so that it will be nice and snug and kind of pulled up. So what we want to do is take this end here, trying to make it so you can see easily. Take this end and line the collar up with it. We want that fold that is created from sewing the seam, so that on the end there you kind of have two little folds. And we're gonna first pin that in place here on the end. Now there are different ways of constructing collars, of course. If you've done it differently before, that's fine. This is how we like to do it with this pattern. So I got that one in place. Now I'm going to put another pin, and I'm going to continue pinning from the outside of the shirt in. Now as I do, notice again it appears that my collar is a little too short for the shoulder or the neck holder, but it's not. What we do is we'll kind of, again, make it a 3D motion. So this comes up and this kind of slides down into it. Another way you can refer to it as is that you're kind of stretching this collar. It's not actually stretching, but it's kind of the idea as you go. So see how we slipped it down in there. Okay, I'm just explaining so it makes sense as we go how, even though it appears to be too short, it's actually perfect. And I know my seam's kind of coming apart there, but that's just a mistake I made. And we'll make it work. As I sew that, I'll just kind of slip it back together like that. But it's not a pucker at all. I'm not folding any of that length in. Okay. And notice that I'm kind of working them towards each other, towards that seam. But I did start at a shoulder. Now after I do this, I'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. And it will look better too, since hopefully my other shoulder seam isn't coming apart right there. Okay, so we can see that from there to there I have the collar attached with pins. Now we'll do the same thing on the other end. Again, I take this the little folded section of the color, and I want to line that right up with the fold here of our button placket. You line those right up so that the folds are together and the raw edges are together. And you just take the other part of the collar down out of the way for now. And pin that in place. So you can see again, I have two folds here. And then sew on out, or pin on out toward the center again. Now I like to use a lot of pins. If you've done this several times, you could probably get away with less pins. But I don't like taking any chances. While I'm at the sewing machine, I like to be able to just sew along fast, remove my pins as I go. See, here, you can see my seam is a little bit better there. But again, it looks like it's too short, so I just pull it kind of down inside until they line up. It's a little more rounded there, but it's going to be good. We're just about done pinning here. All right, I think we're good. You can see I went all the way along my collar, and on each end we have nice folds with the other side of the collar pulled out of the way. So what I'm going to do now is, again, I like to turn it so that this nice flat easy edge is on the bottom when I sew. It's the part that I can't see, because I like to keep this top part where it could get creased in the sewing stitches. But I just, as I sew, I like to kind of keep an eye on that. So I'm going to start here and sew. Now, in our pattern, we use a 1/4 inch seam allowance so that it matches up all the other seams we did on the collar. So I am ready to go ahead and sew that. Okay, now I have sewn the collar on. I went along those pins and I sewed the collar on right along there. So now what we're going to do is flip the shirt to the inside, and we'll pull this collar down just like that. And because we already pressed this 1/4 inch under, it's going to be really easy. We just overlap it over that stitching, and we're going to pin it in place all along. But how I like to do it is to make sure we get those ends just the right place before we do that. It's actually easier if I turn it upside down from where I'm at. So what we'll do is, on the end here, I grab the little fold and I kind of tuck it under. Now that does require some of those stitches there kind of loosening up a bit. So you should be able to get it under there, because remember, we didn't sew into that bottom fourth, so it should let us do that. And again, you should end up with only folds on the edges. There should be no raw edges. And as I do that, I just go ahead and pin that in place. Right close to the end, and that'll help keep that there. And then I'll usually put in 2 or 3 on this end before moving to the other end. See, so again, I'm taking it just far enough to cover that stitching, and this is going to enclose the stitching all the way along, so there's no seam showing on the collar. I really like doing my collars this way. So we'll be on the other end here. I do the same. I fold that edge under that's already ironed that way and make it overlap the stitching up there. Your first time doing it, you kind of have to figure out the right way for it to enclose things. Stick your pin in. Oh, off the screen. Stick your pin in there. So there you see, again, on each end we want it to be nicely pinned in there before we do any of the middle part. Now I can go on to the next place. This fabric is a little hard to pin into. I used a bed sheet to cut my pieces out of, and it's really tightly woven. Okay, So there you see on each end I did 2 or 3 pins. Now what I'm going to do is continue along there, just covering up that little edge. Okay, here you can see that I went ahead and pinned the collar in place. I folded that edge over the 1/4 inch that we ironed earlier, and now it is folded under and pinned in place all along this edge of the collar. Now you want to kind of look at the other side and make sure that you didn't get any overlapping parts. Since we weren't looking at it, I always check to make sure it looks okay in back. Okay, now we are ready to go sew it. What I usually do is I like to top stitch close to the edge, just around this little edge and right there, just to make sure it's neat and secure. And I do that on both ends. But then I turn my whole collar over and I'm going to top stitch the rest of it along the bottom edge, up the curves, and up and around all the way around the edge of the collar. That'll make it secure on that side and secure on this side, and there are no raw edges showing anywhere. Now I have sewn my collar in place. I just went ahead and top stitched all the way around the collar. You can see that it's on there all the way around. If you look at it on the back side, it caught that pinned edge in. I did remove my pins as I go. I guess you could stitch over them, but it's not real great for your machine to do that, so I usually remove the pins as I go. And notice that on the edges, everything's enclosed. There shouldn't be raw edges anywhere. And you can go ahead and sew on your buttons or use snaps or whatever you want to, and then you are done with your shirt. You have a nice little fitted shirt that you can be proud of. That has good tailored sleeves and all the seams are enclosed on the neck. And you're all ready to go.
Bye. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe.